Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today I want to talk to you about the books that I have read so far in the month of October. So my mid-month wrap-up, and we'll get right into it because I have 8 books I want to talk about. So let's jump right into it. The first book I want to talk about is a non-fiction, and that is Gods of the Upper Air: How a Circle of Renegade Anthropologists Reinvented Race, Sex and Gender in the 20th Century. This is, as the title suggests, a non-fiction about the history of the discipline of anthropology, or a specific part of the history of the discipline of anthropology, so the first half of the 20th century. And it follows a bunch of anthropologists, more specifically Franz Boas, who was a German anthropologist who moved to America and then worked there, and also some of his students, more specifically again Margaret Mead, Ruth Benedict, as well as Zora Neale Hurston. And the thing that these anthropologists did is that they went against what was like the going theory in anthropology, in science at the time. And that theory was evolutionism, so that race, that culture kind of goes through a development. And on one hand you have primitive cultures like indigenous people, or a lot of indigenous cultures. And on the other hand you have, of course, Western civilization, which is like the height of development for cultures. And these anthropologists very much went against that. They basically said that race is a completely arbitrary category. They also said that our sexual habits, our gender preferences aren't like an end-all be-all, but that depending on the culture you will have different sexualities, you will have different genders, and so on. And in that way it was a really interesting book. And if you're not familiar with anthropology, if you're not familiar with cultural relativism, which is what like their school was called, it's the School of Cultural Relativism, then I think it's definitely an interesting book to pick up. However, I study cultural and social anthropology. I in fact had an exam only a month ago, less than a month ago, 3 weeks ago, on the history of the discipline of anthropology, in which I had to study exactly these anthropologists and their theories and their works. So it was kind of unnecessary for me to read. I didn't really learn anything new. Mostly, if I learned anything new, it was like specifics about the biographies of the anthropologists, which, by the way, I'm surprised there isn't yet a biopic about Margaret Mead, because on the one hand you would have like this amazing possibility to romanticize this person as like this savior, this out of her time woman who like didn't judge other cultures by the standards that every other white person judged those cultures at the moment, and who like kind of was revolutionary in her theories. And also she had like a really crazy private life. She had always at least 2 lovers, then also always a husband. She was bisexual. It's like, why isn't there a biopic about Margaret Mead yet? Maybe there is and I just don't know it, but who knows. But anyway, aside from my own personal problem that I had with this book, mainly that I knew everything already, I thought that the way it's structured was very nice. You go in chronological order in the book, and then whenever there's like a new theory, a new work that's talked about any of the anthropologists, you then kind of get an excursion into what's like the end-all be-all in American science at the moment and in American sociology at the moment. And you kind of get an excursion into history in the discipline until that moment, so you don't have to know like what evolutionism is, it's explained to you, and so on. However, I would have wished that there was a bit more about cultural relativism. I found that like the main part of the book kind of is about the anthropologists and their biographies, and less so about their theories and their works. I mean, a little bit, but not quite enough for me. So yeah, I gave this 3 stars just because I already knew everything, but I think if I hadn't known everything, I would have given this book 4 stars. So now that was a very long time talking about the first book, and now we'll go by star rating again. Now I'm into all the fiction that I read this month. The first book is going to be very quick, and that is Winter's Heart by Robert Jordan, which is book 9 in the Wheel of Time series. I gave this just under 3 stars. I was kind of bored throughout most of the book. I thought there wasn't really anything happening. Like, the tension throughout the book was the same from beginning to end. There almost wasn't any like resolution to any of the problems that were there at the beginning of the book. So yeah, the series is kind of starting to drag for me, to be honest. Next, I read Black Spring by Alison Croghan. This is apparently a retelling of Wuthering Heights. However, I have never read Wuthering Heights, so I can't say how accurate that is. And it's the story of a young girl who's a witch in a society where witches are like seen as the devil. However, she is of the blood of the king, and that like kind of saves her because of that. However, she still has a miserable life, and this book is kind of her life story as it is told by her childhood friend slash like governess, handmaiden, I don't know, whatever you call it. And I did enjoy it. However, I felt it was very depressing, and I wasn't really in a depressed type of mood. Also, all the characters are assholes, and I sometimes like that, I sometimes don't like that. I wasn't in the mood for that when I read this, so I gave it 3 stars overall. Next, I have another 3 stars, and I was a bit disappointed that this was only a 3 stars, to be honest, but that book is 1,000 Ships by Natalie Haynes. This is a retelling kind of the Trojan War, but what it is looking at the perspectives of the women that experienced the Trojan War, be they the goddesses who kind of started the Trojan War, or be they the Trojan women, or be they Penelope waiting for Odysseus back home. Actually, Penelope, her perspective I loved the most. She was one of the women who got like the most chapters. Most other women only got 1, maybe 2 chapters. And I loved how Penelope kind of changed throughout the novel, how you kind of see her longingly waiting at home at the beginning of the novel, and then being kind of done with Odysseus and kind of exasperated by the end. So I really did enjoy that. But some of the reasons why I didn't enjoy it was, first of all, it was really depressing, which again isn't necessarily something negative, but wasn't exactly what I wanted at the moment. And also, I wonder why I was so surprised that it was so depressing, because it's following the lives of women during a war, most of whom either died or ended up as slaves. So yeah, why was I surprised? But then something where I had aspects that I liked and that I didn't like was that a lot of the women were distinctly unlikable characters. And I did enjoy that, because in these types of novels so often the women then get put on a pedestal as those pure beings, and oh, how tragic it is that they have to go through this because they are so pure. And I did like that they were unlikable, but it was still tragic that they had to go through these things. However, what I then didn't like is that this unlikability sometimes turned into kind of girl hate and bitch fighting, and that happened especially when it comes to Helen, which everyone in this book hated. However, she did not get her own POV chapter, which I'm not sure if I like that decision necessarily. I mean, you can still make Helen an unlikable character, but you know, don't just have every character in this book hate on Helen because she's responsible for the war, but then don't like subvert that, as in like maybe she isn't as irresponsible as everyone pretends she is. So I kind of did not like that aspect of the book, and that was the main aspect why I only gave it 3 stars. And I did like the writing of the book though. Next, I have a 3.5 stars, and that is a classic. That is Camilla by Joseph Sheridan Le Fanu. I finally read this. I have this, like I have owned this since I was 12, I think, since I first read Twilight, because afterwards I just wanted to read all the vampire classics. But of course my English wasn't good enough to read them, and I bought all of them in English for some reason, which who knows what my decision was there. But as I said, this is a vampire classic. I think this is even older than Dracula, and it's set in Styria, so where my mom is from. Actually quite close to where my mom is from is where it's set. And Styria is in Austria, by the way. It's a county in Austria, for those of you who don't know. And it follows a young woman, and one day there's this other young woman who appears at her like castle thingy, and this young woman, like, something's weird about her, and our main character, whose name I have forgotten, suddenly starts getting weaker and weaker. And this book is so gay. It's so gay. I mean, there's still some homophobia in there because of course it was written, I don't know when, early 19th century I think, but it is so gay. And I enjoyed it very, very much. Next, I have a sequel that I read, and that is Heart of Flames by Nikki Paupleto, which is the sequel to Crown of Feathers. And in this series, this is a YA high fantasy series. We follow Veronica, whose dream it is to become a Phoenix Rider. However, the Phoenix Riders have been outlawed since that war a few years ago, I think like 16, 15, 16, 17, however old Veronica is. Since that war, Phoenix Riders have been outlawed. And so she is on the search for a phoenix egg that she can bond so she can become a Phoenix Rider, and also she's on the search for the Phoenix Riders so she can join them. And I really enjoyed the sequel. I think I enjoyed it more than book one. I really enjoyed Veronica's development. She has become a lot stronger. I love Veronica's relationship with Val, just like in the first book. In the first book, I couldn't enjoy it quite as much because Val enraged me too much, but I think it's just a really well done, toxic, gaslighting relationship. And it really shows Veronica's development in this book, how like she developed in the relationship, how she dealt with the relationship. And I also really enjoyed the romance. And yeah, I'm really excited for book 3, which probably is going to be published in 2021. The next book I want to talk about is one of my most anticipated releases of 2020, and that is Nightshine by Tessa Gretton, which I sadly didn't give 5 stars, however I did give it 4/4.5 stars. By the way, if you can hear noise, my roommate woke up and started cooking. But this story is kind of a retelling of Howl's Moving Castle, except it's not really a retelling of the story of Howl's Moving Castle. I mean, I haven't finished the series, but not as far as I can tell. It's not a retelling of the first book or the movie. However, what you do get is kind of like pendants to the characters in Howl's Moving Castle, and you also have like a living castle that has a soul, that has a demon inside, and so on. And in this story we follow Nothing, who is the best friend of the prince. Now, one day said prince vanishes, and Nothing, as well as the prince's bodyguard, think he has been kidnapped by the sorceress who eats girls. Which can't be, because obviously, as the name suggests, said sorceress only kidnaps girls. However, Nothing, as well as the prince's bodyguard, are aware of a secret of the prince, which might suggest that, you know, there's some possibility behind the sorceress having kidnapped the prince. Now, this is an essentially queer book. It's queer to the very bottom of it. And with that, I do not mean that all of the main characters are queer, that all of the main romances are queer. With that, I mean that at the very bottom of the book, at the very center of the book, is kind of the need and the question and the suggestion, the message that you shouldn't let other people name you, that you can give yourself your own name, that you, by giving yourself your own name, can determine who you are, and that other people shouldn't be allowed to tell you who you are at the very center of yourself. Not like in a kind of surface level, I can be whatever I want to be, I can be a firewoman, I can be a scientist, not like that level, but like to the very bottom of yourself, and that it doesn't really matter what gender you are, what sexuality you are, and so on. And I really enjoyed that. However, the reason why I only give it 4 to 4.5 stars is mostly the writing style, and I can see the writing style being the reason why a lot of people give this even less stars, because it's not kind of the simple, easy to get into writing style of most YA. This book isn't really written like YA in general. You don't have this strong connection to the characters. I mean, you do, but it's kind of very whimsical. It's kind of written like a fairy tale with a lot of metaphors and so on. And so yeah, I did enjoy that, but I didn't enjoy it quite as much to give it 5 stars, just 4.5 stars. Now the last book I want to talk about is my 5-star read for this month so far, and that is The Invisible Life of Eddie LaRue by V. Schwab. This is my first Schwab book, and I mean, I still don't want to read her other books, I'm still not really that interested in them, but this book destroyed me. I think I read it in 2 or 3 days. This is a kind of Faustian deal type of story where you follow Eddie LaRue, who at the beginning of the 18th century makes a deal to live forever. Not necessarily forever, but to live as long as she wants to live. However, the other side of the coin of that deal is that no one will ever remember her, and as soon as she vanishes out of the sight of someone, the next time they look at her, they won't remember her. Now, she has lived like that for 300 years, and one day she walks into a bookshop and the boy there, or the man there, remembers her. And it's about that. And this book has no plot, first of all. It has no plot. It's not a thing where it's then like, okay, he remembers her and now they want to go out and try to break her curse or anything like that. That's not the story. This book literally is just her backstory, his backstory, and then in between the dates they go on, and it's so cute, and then the ending is absolutely heartbreaking, and I cried so much reading this book. But yeah, the writing is beautiful, the characters are amazing. I absolutely loved Eddie so much. I also loved Henry, who is the boy who remembers her. And yeah, I can just highly recommend this book. I know there's a lot of hype around this right now, but it's 100% warranted in my opinion. I really loved it, and if you don't mind the plotlessness of the book, then go ahead and read it. And that was it for this video. That was it for my October mid-month wrap-up. I will now go and edit and upload it. And with that said, if you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribe. Tell me in the comments down below what you have read so far this month, and if you have read any of the books that I have read this month, what were your thoughts on them? And also all the links to my social media are in the description box down below, so go and check those out. All the links to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, in which we read 1 adult high fantasy per month, will also be linked down below. 1 adult high fantasy written by a woman. I always forget to say that. Also, the poll for the read for November is probably going to go up sometime today. The books that are probably going to be on there are, first of all, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse, then also The Bone Shard Daughter, which was the runner-up last month, and I'm always gonna put the runner-up on the poll for the next month. And then the last 2 I don't know yet. And with that said, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!